There are some places in this world where people go missing, and the explanations left behind somehow feel even more terrifying than the disappearance itself. Places where investigators close files, governments bury reports, and witnesses spend the rest of their lives refusing to speak about what they saw. High within the freezing Ural Mountains of Russia, there is a slope known as Dead Mountain, a place where violent storms erase footprints within minutes, where temperatures fall low enough to freeze a human body solid overnight, and where, in 1959, 9 experienced hikers vanished under circumstances so horrifying that even now, decades later, nobody can fully explain what happened to them. Because when rescue teams finally reached their campsite, they discovered something deeply disturbing, something that instantly told investigators this was not a normal survival tragedy, not an avalanche, not simply people lost in a storm. Their tent, it had been ripped open from the inside. The people inside had fled barefoot into a frozen wasteland in the middle of the night. And whatever terrified them out there was never officially explained. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an experienced expedition leader known for surviving brutal mountain conditions. The team consisted of students, athletes, engineers, people trained to survive the wilderness. This was not a group that panicked easily. They knew the cold, they knew the mountains, they knew what could kill them out there. But what happened on that mountain was something far worse than freezing temperatures. Before they disappeared, the hikers documented almost everything with cameras and journals. At first, the expedition looked normal. Smiling faces, snow-covered trails, inside jokes, songs around campfires. One photograph showed the group while setting up equipment in waist-deep snow. Another showed one of the hikers staring into the woods behind the cameraman, with an expression that investigators later described as deeply disturbed. Nobody noticed it at the time. As the group climbed higher into the mountains, weather conditions worsened. Winds screamed across the slopes, hard enough to erase footprints within minutes. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees, but according to the journals, something else had begun bothering the hikers. One entry simply read, "We can't shake the feeling that someone is following us." That same night, one of the hikers reportedly woke up screaming. The others asked what happened, but he refused to answer. He only kept staring beyond the tent flap into the darkness outside. Another member later wrote that strange orange lights had appeared in the distance near the mountain ridge. They hovered silently during the storm, unmoving, watching. At first, the group believed the lights were military flares, but flares fall. These lights did not. They remained perfectly still for nearly 10 minutes before suddenly disappearing all at once. One of the hikers jokingly called them eyes in the mountain. Nobody laughed. Days later, the team reached the eastern slope of a mountain known by the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, which roughly translates to Dead Mountain. According to local legend, the mountain was considered cursed, a place where people vanished. Some Mansi hunters even refused to go near it after dark, but the hikers ignored the warnings. They believed superstition was for weak minds. Science explained everything. At least, that's what they thought then. On the night of February 1st, the group set up their tent on the exposed slope, rather than descending into safer forest below. Investigators later questioned this decision. The location left them completely vulnerable to the storm. Wind battered the tent non-stop. Snow piled against the canvas walls. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. And sometime after nightfall, something changed. One recovered journal entry ended abruptly mid-sentence. The final line read, "There's something outside thee." Then nothing. According to investigators, the hikers suddenly cut their way out of the tent from the inside using knives. Not one exit cut, multiple. Panic cuts, violent cuts, the kind people make when they believe staying inside means death. They abandoned boots, heavy coats, supplies, flashlights. One flashlight was later found on top of the tent, still working, covered in snow. Imagine that for a second. Experienced hikers, in -30-degree weather, running barefoot into darkness. Whatever frightened them that night was more terrifying than freezing to death. Rescuers later discovered footprints leading away from the tent. But the footprints were strange. Some hikers appeared to be walking calmly, others were stumbling. One set of tracks circled around the others repeatedly, as if someone, or something, had been watching them as they fled downhill. Nearly a mile from the campsite, beneath a massive cedar tree, rescuers found the first 2 bodies. Both were barefoot. Both were wearing only thin underclothes. Their hands were shredded and bleeding, as if they had desperately climbed the tree trying to escape something below. Broken branches were found nearly 15 feet high. Something had terrified them enough to climb into freezing darkness with bare hands. And then investigators noticed something else. Skin fragments were embedded deep into the bark above them, alongside pieces of fingernail. The men hadn't simply climbed the tree. They had clawed their way upward in panic. Nearby, remains of a small fire were discovered beneath the cedar. The hikers had tried to survive, but survival wasn't their only concern. Their bodies were positioned facing back toward the forest, toward the mountain, as though they had died watching something approach through the snow. 3 more bodies were later found between the cedar tree and the tent. They appeared to have been crawling back uphill before collapsing. One had frozen with his hand extended forward, fingers dug into ice, as if trying to pull himself away from something behind him. Then came the final discovery. Months later, after snow began melting, rescuers uncovered the remaining 4 hikers buried deep within a ravine. And their injuries made no sense. One woman was missing her tongue. Another victim had severe chest fractures so powerful that investigators compared them to a high-speed car crash, yet there were almost no external wounds. One man's skull was crushed inward, another had missing eyes. But perhaps the strangest detail of all was that several articles of clothing tested positive for abnormal levels of radiation. No explanation fully matched the evidence. Avalanche theories failed because the tent was still partially standing. Military testing theories failed because no official records existed. Animal attacks failed because there were no signs of struggle near the campsite. Even hypothermia couldn't explain why the hikers fled in coordinated terror before freezing. And then investigators found the photographs. Most showed ordinary expedition moments, hiking, smiling, snowstorms. But the final images recovered from the camera were different. Blurred, distorted. One photo appeared to show a tall, dark figure standing between trees in the distance. Another showed only streaks of white snow, except for something almost hidden near the edge of the frame. A face, pale, human-like, but wrong somehow. Its eyes reflected pure white against darkness. Soviet authorities sealed many details of the investigation for years. Rumors spread everywhere. Some believed the hikers encountered escaped prisoners. Others believed secret military weapons caused hallucinations and panic. But among locals, another theory survived. one older than the Soviet Union itself. The Mansi hunters believed the mountain was inhabited by something ancient, something that did not want visitors staying after dark. They told stories about hearing voices in storms, stories about shapes moving across snowfields where no footprints existed, stories about people walking willingly into the cold as though called by something unseen. One rescue volunteer later gave an interview decades after the incident. He admitted there was one detail authorities never publicly explained. While searching near the tent, they found additional tracks in the snow that did not belong to any member of the expedition. The footprints were larger, oddly spaced, and impossible to follow because they ended abruptly in open snow. No return tracks, no signs of where they went, just gone. And that wasn't the only thing witnesses reported. Multiple rescue members later described hearing strange humming sounds at night while camping near the mountain. One man claimed he woke up to see a dark silhouette standing beyond their campfire. He thought it was another rescuer, until the figure suddenly moved backward into darkness without making a sound. Another volunteer refused to continue the search after claiming he heard voices whispering outside his tent during a blizzard. He said the voices sounded almost human, except they kept repeating names of the dead hikers, one by one. Even stranger. Several investigators involved in the case later died under unusual circumstances over the following years. Some suffered unexplained illnesses. Others refused to discuss the incident entirely. One investigator reportedly admitted shortly before his death, "There are things on that mountain we were never supposed to see." To this day, nobody truly knows what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Scientists continue debating avalanches, infrasound, military experiments, and weather phenomena. But none of those theories fully explain the fear, because fear leaves patterns, and the evidence from that mountain shows one terrifying truth above all else. Those hikers were not trying to survive the cold. They were trying to escape something. Something powerful enough to drive trained explorers half naked into a frozen wilderness. Something terrifying enough to make them abandon safety, friends, logic, everything. And whatever stood outside that tent on February 1st, 1959, may still be there, waiting beyond the storms of Dead Mountain, hidden beneath endless snow, watching for lights in the darkness. Because every few years, hikers traveling near Dyatlov Pass report the same thing. Strange orange lights moving silently over the mountain ridge. Footsteps outside tents with nobody there. Voices carried through blizzards. And sometimes, if the storm is bad enough, they say you can hear screaming echoing somewhere far above the slopes. Screaming that suddenly stops. Thanks for sipping tonight's tale with Haunted Brew. Don't forget to subscribe, and sleep tight if you still can.